peace was threatened by the most critical period in history since the end of the war. Red Puppet Castro and the Russians turned Cuba into an island fortress, and U.S. planes spotted missile installations aimed at key points in the Western Hemisphere. Planes brought back evidence that moved the Organization of American States and the Western Allies to back President Kennedy unanimously when he declared an arms blockade of Cuba and laid down an ultimatum.
To halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. All ships of any kind bound for Cuba, from whatever nation or port, will, if found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back.
In the face of U.S. determination, the Soviets dismantled their missiles and bombers and shipped them home. It was the retreat to Moscow. The democracies had served notice on the Russians that any aggressive threat in the Western Hemisphere would not be tolerated. The Wall of Shame in Berlin was 1 year old. It was in 1961 that East German communists, appalled at the numbers who were fleeing to the West, threw up the wall. The Reds were constantly at work reinforcing the wall, but still people fled to the West. Some were successful, some were not. The civilized world cried shame when East German guards shot a fleeing teenager and then left him to die. They removed his body, but they will never remove him as a symbol to the angered Germans. They vented their wrath on buses carrying Russian guards to a Soviet war memorial and turned to the West Berlin Freedom Bell to voice their unity as a people. The Allies continued to stand firm in Berlin, and the Germans made a national hero of U.S. General Lucius Clay, who continued to be a leading spokesman for German freedom. France was at peace for the first time since 1939, as President Charles de Gaulle's government brought the war to an end in Algeria. It was the end of nearly 8 years of bloodshed, and the African nation won its freedom after 132 years of rule. The man who emerged as strongman was Vice Premier Ben Bella, a leftist who soon found himself beset with a score of problems. He had to turn to France for help as the new nation faced an economic collapse. India found the path of neutralism a hard one in a world torn by strife. Red China poured troops over her northern frontier, and India's people mobilized to meet the threat. India had been ill-prepared to defend herself, and Defense Minister Krishna Menon was deposed. The people donated their jewelry and life savings to the defense effort as their government sought aid. The West responded quickly to Prime Minister Nehru's appeal, but Russia's heady promises never materialized. Neutralism seemed to be withering. Death came to one of the world's most extraordinary and beloved women. Eleanor Roosevelt made the role of First Lady a dynamic one as she walked with the great and the humble. She spent her later years as an avid worker for peace through the UN and was beloved by children visiting the family estate. An international humanitarian, she leaves a legacy of accomplishment. Pope John XXIII made modern church history when he called an ecumenical council of high-ranking prelates to consider reforms and changes in liturgy. The 81-year-old pontiff was stricken during the council, but recovered to take part in ceremonies before recess. Above all, 1962 was a year of spectacular space achievements. Overnight, Colonel John H. Glenn was a national hero when he became the first American to orbit the Earth. The climax of 3 years of effort, his flight spurred new efforts to beat the Russians to the moon. It was a down-to-earth welcome for the colonel as he was greeted by his wife. There were tears of supreme happiness. A cheering nation heaped honors on Colonel Glenn, whose 80,000-mile odyssey helped the United States blaze a trail to the stars. The U.S. pushed its space program still further ahead when Scott Carpenter followed in Glenn's star-studded footsteps. He brought back more data that scientists termed invaluable. Uncle Sam's most ambitious space flight quickly followed, as Commander Walter M. Schirra made 6 orbits of the Earth. So great was his success that the U.S. prepared to move more quickly into the larger Gemini program, a 2-man capsule, and the Apollo mooncraft. Glenn, Carpenter, and Xxiii. History books will record them as the pioneers of '62. A new era in worldwide communications was opened with the orbiting of Telstar, a satellite carrying complex electronic equipment. Once in orbit, Telstar picks up a signal from Earth, magnifies it 10 billion times, and relays it to a receiving station. Pictures that were broadcast from the U.S. to Europe and back had remarkable clarity. With outstanding space achievements in 1962, the United States prepares to push ahead with more ambitious projects. The Gemini is expected to make a space station rendezvous within 2 or 3 years. As the year drew to a close, the Mariner satellite probed Venus 36 million miles away, and work was progressing on Project Rover, a nuclear-powered moon vehicle. A year of crisis and progress, 1962.